You're listening to A Seat at the Tech Table, a podcast by Sisters in Tech, hosted by Anna and Esther Kofariji. This podcast highlights the experiences of Black women working and thriving in the tech industry. You'll learn about how they found their paths into tech, and hopefully you'll be inspired to consider whether there's a seat for you at the tech table.
Today's guest is Leena Taha, a London-based content designer.
Hey, Leena!
Hey, sisters. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited to speak with you. We'd love you to introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you're from, and what you do.
Well, my name's Leena Taha, and I'm a content designer based in London. I'm from Sudan, and I now live in London.
Great stuff. Okay, so we are very excited to kind of jump into your career journey and find out how you got into tech. But let's start kind of way back when. Let's start kind of from the beginning. What were your early interests? What did you study at university?
So when I was younger, I loved reading. I think that was my main thing. I read all the time, like when I came home from school, at school, like in my lunch breaks. That was my main thing. And then going through school, I probably, I did really like art, but I was very good at maths. So really, I did mainly maths and science subjects because I was good at them. And then I still enjoyed reading, but I don't know if I did it so much in my teenage years. And then when I was at university, I studied international history and international relations, mainly because I was unsure what I wanted to do, and I had actually decided to become a pilot, but then my careers advisor told me that you don't have the money to become a pilot, which is a ridiculous thing to say because that's not what it's about. So then I had done maths, physics, chemistry, and history for my A-levels. And I was like, oh, well, if I'm not a pilot, what am I going to be? And then I thought, oh, I'll do engineering. And then they were like, oh, if you do engineering, you have to become an engineer. But I was like, but I want to become a pilot. So I was like, okay, there's only one subject left that I've done, which is history. So I'll just do that. And so then I thought, okay, I'll just do this. And then I can always like decide a bit later. So that was my reasoning behind it. And so then I really wanted to be in London. So I went to LSE, did international history, and I enjoyed it.
Cool. Okay.
Cool. Okay, so from history, how did you kind of transition into your early career? I know history it's kind of one of those subjects that opens up a lot of opportunities, but there's not necessarily one career that it kind of draws itself into. So how did you move on?
Yeah, that's very true, because even before I started doing history, everyone was like, oh, it will open you out to many options. But I think sometimes if something opens you out to many options, it almost makes it more confusing for you, because you're like, but what am I meant to do? What is my next step after this? So then when I graduated, I think I was very lost probably at that time, and I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was also really confused, and when you're only 22, everybody else is also confused too. So it's like you're friends with all these other confused people, you're confused yourself, you're not sure what to do. And I feel like you feel, and definitely how I felt, was that I needed to have everything sorted, and I definitely didn't at that time. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Even after these 3 years of studying, I was still unsure. So then I moved back home to where my parents lived for about a year. And then my sister had started working at this company called Farfetch, which is a luxury fashion company it sells clothes from different luxury fashion boutiques from around the world. And she was writing product descriptions. And so she got me my first job writing product descriptions. So we kind of joke about it to this day that we used to sit and we'd write 2 lapels and a buttoned shirt, or like trousers with a zip and an embroidery feature or something. So yeah, that's what I did. And I'd have to write like maybe 60 to 70 product descriptions per day. So that was my first job, somewhat in tech, you could say, because it was an early stage company, and we were writing all the product descriptions for their website. So that was my first taste of tech, let's say.
Amazing. And I'd love to kind of get a sense of when you got that job. Obviously, this was kind of an in you got from your sister. Did you have a sense of, oh my gosh, this is a career? Or was it just, okay, this is an interesting next step? How did you kind of perceive it at that time?
I think how I perceived it was, I have a job. I'm earning some money. This is new. I can actually, I can move back to London was the main thing. I can see my friends. This job I can do. This is great. I didn't really have a sense that this was it. This was my career. I kind of thought, oh, this is like a first step. And I was happy with it because I think at first I worked from home. The entire time I worked from home. And then maybe after 2 months, then I started going into the office every so often in London. And I remember, especially at that time, I was like, I felt really Sex in the City, like I'm in London with my job. And then, and it was in Shoreditch, and I enjoyed like going for lunch and seeing like different people also on their lunch break. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm actually doing something. So I did feel like I was happy that it was my first step, but I didn't know if this was going to be what I wanted to do. I was unsure what I wanted to do. I didn't even realize at this time that that's it. I was working in tech. I really didn't have an understanding of tech or all the roles in it when I first started that job.
Very cool. I think I actually really like that, because I think sometimes when people talk about, oh, working in tech, and it's this kind of intimidating thing, but there's so many tech companies, fashion tech companies, med tech companies, like there's so many kind of different streams that you can just, like you did, find yourself working in a tech.
Exactly. That's exactly it. Like I think this idea of tech is that everybody's going off and doing techie things, and and it's like so unattainable, and I don't really understand it. But really, as you said, there are so many different companies, tech companies. You have ones like Farfetch, which is like if you're really interested in fashion, it's a great one. Or you have like where I work now, which is in transport. Or and within tech, there are loads of different roles that you don't really have an understanding of before you join. And that's the same as how I got into content design. If you'd come to me at that time and said, what is a content designer? I would have no idea.
So how did you come to realize that content design was a career, essentially?
That is a very good point. I think the first time I knew there was a thing called a content designer was my first job in the civil service. Before I got it, I saw there was a role for a content designer, and usually I would just see a role like that and just be like, oh, well, I'm not a content designer. But then I had like grown in confidence a little bit. And I had started learning all those facts you're told, like men apply for a job where they only have 60% of the skills, and women only apply if they have 100%. So I was like, no, I'm going to do that. I'm like, I know some of these skills. I'm going to apply for this job. So then the role said that you needed to be able to break down complex information into simple language. It said that, you need to be able to use data to make content decisions, like being able to use analytics data. But even then, I don't think at that time, I'm not sure if I had that level of experience, but I knew that generally what it was saying, I could do some of them and I could definitely learn more of them. So I saw the content designer job, and then I was like, I'm going to apply for it. And I'm also going to find out more and more about what content design is, so that if they give me an interview, I know exactly what to say and what to do. So it was partly like I was like, okay, I'm going to apply for this job. And then 2, I'm going to go and figure out what content design is and how I can be a content designer.
That's it. I think that's really good. I just feel like sometimes we feel like we have to know everything that's in a job description, or be very clued up in terms of knowing exactly what we're getting ourselves into. But it sounds as if you were pretty brave you're quite open to just kind of finding out a bit more about it, whether that be kind of getting the job and learning on the job, or just essentially learning about it so that when you were in a better position, you can apply yourself. So sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, that's exactly it. Because even when job descriptions are written, I often joke, a content designer didn't write the job description. So when it's written, they may just write it in a way that they understand, not necessarily that everybody else will understand. So it might just be that the job description is written confusingly and there's something that you can do, but it's actually just written in a way that you think it's something different. So yeah, I definitely think when reading job descriptions, it's like to focus on the parts that you can do, definitely.
For sure. Okay, so how exactly did you upskill yourself as a content designer?
So so before I applied for this content design job, and I was working in a job where I had to update the website. So my job wasn't really a content job. It wasn't working on, it wasn't predominantly on web content. However, I started updating the website and I realized, A, I like this, and B, I can do it. Yeah. And it also involved learning lots of new skills. Like they were like, okay, we have this CMS. So I was like, okay, I need to learn that CMS. So then I taught myself that CMS. And then the content management system that they use to put content on the website. And then sometimes when I would need to go into the content management system to edit something, I would notice it would all be in HTML, which would be a markup language that they use to put things on the website. So I was like, okay, I'm going to teach myself that. So then I taught myself HTML. And then there were other skills, like we needed like Google Analytics. And I noticed that there was this girl on the team who wrote reports every quarter on how many people were visiting our website, which pages they were leaving at, so that we knew like we would be able to learn more about why they were doing that. So then I was like, okay, I need to teach myself Google Analytics. So then anything I saw, I was just like, okay, I'm going to teach myself this. So then I'm like gaining digital skills so I can pivot myself into a digital role. Like I'm not in one now, but I'm going to make this role as much as possible a digital role. So that was the main thing I did.
So just based off what you've just said, did you feel like you were in a digital role kind of as a content designer, or did you feel like you wanted to maybe explore other roles in tech?
At this point, the role that I'm speaking about wasn't a content designer role. It was, I think it was a coordinator role. I was in a coordinator role, and they were, and it wasn't really tech focused at all, really, but they said, oh, you need to update the website. And so then when I started updating the website and realizing I could do it, and then building all these skills, then they started seeing, oh, this is great because we don't actually have a web designer here. So then when I was building up these skills, then they started giving me more and more web design roles. So then actually my job started becoming 75% tech. And then they had this big project where they wanted to completely redesign the website. And I remember they got in these 2 consultants to come and do it. But then because they realized that I worked for them and I could actually do it better, then in the end, I got to do it and I got to redesign their website. And so then it became a tech role when it wasn't before, but because I had kind of taken some onus on doing it myself, I was like, I need to know this, so I'm going to teach myself that.
Amazing. Yeah, I really love that. I think something you just said a second ago was, anything I saw, I said, okay, I'm going to teach myself this. And that is the attitude that you need to have. I think, especially in the digital sector where kind of things change all the time, where in a lot of ways roles are fluid. So like just the way you did, you can start off in one thing, upskill yourself and easily become expert in another thing. So I think just for the listeners, taking the opportunities where you see them to develop your skills and learn is what's going to get you kind of into certain roles and to the next stage of your career. So I really love that.
Exactly. And I think like whenever you teach yourself something, say that you taught yourself it.
Yeah.
So if you taught yourself HTML, then on your CV say, I taught myself HTML, because I think that's a really good skill to show people that you have, not just that you can teach yourself, but it shows that you're taking the initiative when you know there's a gap in your skill set, and then you go and make sure that you have it. So I think, yeah, definitely any skill that you don't have and you feel you can teach yourself, which you definitely can, then just teach yourself it and then say, I taught myself HTML. And then that's another talking point you can have in the interview.
And I'd love to kind of dig in a little bit actually with kind of the resources you use to teach yourself and maybe any challenges that you faced kind of in this upskilling process.
Yeah, there were some challenges because at first, especially with HTML, I remember thinking, can you really teach yourself HTML? But then I realized it was a belief thing, because the moment I realized I could teach myself, then I became more involved in it. And first of all, I used the internet is a wonderful thing. And there were different sites that I used at the time. I think Codeworthy was one of them.
Okay.
Code Academy, I think, was another one. I'm not sure if it was definitely free at the time, because I was very much on free things. So yeah, I think I used the internet at first, and then I would actually go into the content management system itself and look at the HTML and then look at how it appeared on the website and try and figure out like how a paragraph was made or how bold was made. And with HTML in particular, it's easier than it sounds, because everything has a start and has an end, and so you can find it in the markup. So that was another way I did it. And then when it came to anything else, like more like a skill like Google Analytics, I remember going to my manager and saying, this is why I need to go on this course, and saying, oh, well, I need this course because of this, and this reason. And that company, and I imagine many companies, have a training budget. Mm-hmm. So they were like, okay, if you need to learn this and this is how it will help us, then we'll take you on this training course. So I remember I went on 3 separate training courses, and that really helped. So I think if there is something you want to learn, then check with your company whether they have a training budget and whether it's something that they would be willing to let you learn. But I think it's also about how you frame it, saying, well, this is going to help you because it's going to be X, Y, and Z, and this is going to make your life easier. And then there isn't really a way they can say no. And if they do say no, then you can go on the internet and find a way.
That's it. Internet is your friend.
Yeah. I think that's really key, because I think sometimes if you're lucky, you're at a company that lets you do courses just as part of the course. I was listening to a podcast the other day by a guy from, what company was it? One of these older Basecamp. It was Basecamp, and they kind of give their employees kind of an open budget to do training. Yeah, but I think for most businesses, like you say, you have to slightly make a business case. You have to say how it's going to benefit the business, and once you do, you're actually opening yourself up to kind of lots of opportunities. So that's definitely really great. Okay, so I kind of am starting this journey from writing product descriptions for a fashion company, all the way to kind of through learning HTML, and then getting your first kind of true content design job. And I guess I want to kind of just stick with that journey a bit more. Tell us kind of some, I'm not sure how many roles you had kind of along that journey, but tell us a bit more about the different roles you had. And I think to Anna's point, like, did it ever feel like you might maybe go in a different direction?
I would say my journey was definitely not linear. This is probably the most important point, because most of the time throughout my career, I was very confused. I didn't realize I'd end up here. I was really worried about where I'd end up. I wasn't sure. I made some choices that I thought, was this the right choice? Thinking, no, it wasn't the right choice. Went and did something else, tried something else. And so it was a very roundabout route. And at the time, when I first started, when I did that first product description job, I didn't think that I would be doing a role in tech later on. I just knew at that time I had a job and it was enjoyable enough, and it gave me an in just to the working world in general, not even tech. It gave me an in to the working world. And so when I first left that job, I think my second role after that, or at some point, I ended up at a legal publishing place, and I was like, how have I ended up at a legal publishing place? But it was a writer researcher role, so I was like, oh, this is great, I can be a writer. And I loved saying I am a writer, even though I was writing about legal publishing, which wasn't the most interesting. I was writing about lawyers mainly, like who were the best lawyers of the time. And then, but I knew that potentially I could impress them and then get the assistant editor role. And if I got an assistant editor role, then I was like, oh, I can work in publishing and I can be an editor, and that would be amazing. But then I didn't get the assistant editor role. I took a gamble, which was taking the roles in the hopes that I would get the assistant editor role. And if I did, then I could move into publishing. But I took the gamble. Didn't really work out, some would say. It worked out in the end, but at that time, I felt it hadn't worked out. So then I quit, basically. I really didn't like it. I had spent, by that point, a year, maybe a year and a half in it. I felt that was a lot of time, especially when I was younger. That seemed like so much time. Now I know it's not a long time at all. I quit and I moved to America. It was my big dream. I was like, this is it. I'm off to America, which might seem like an off-kilter choice. But at the time, I was like, I don't like my job. It makes sense to go try a new country, perhaps. Went to America, both liked and disliked some aspects, then ended up going traveling and then came back. And that did really change things, because it changed my perception of what it meant to be successful, and realizing that it was okay that I hadn't figured it out by then, and that I still felt worried. It didn't take away the worry, but then I think I just got older and a little bit wiser. And then I just realized I'm going to try something else. And so then when I came back, I started, when I came back, once again, I had a confused time. And then I set up my own business. And when I set up my own business, I learned so much from that I realized I had certain skills that might be helpful. I'd go do, that's when I found the content designer job. And I was like, I know that from my previous experience, I've done some of these things. I might not have 100% of these things, but I'm going to figure out what the rest of them are. And then I'm going to apply for this job. And that's the time when I got my first content design role.
Amazing. Okay, so much just came out in that, and I just want to dig into a couple of things, or emphasize a couple of things. So a second ago you said you made some choices and then you considered them and then you realized, no, this wasn't the right choice. And I think that is such an important thing for people to slightly be comfortable with, that sometimes you're going to choose a role and it's not going to work out. And
exactly.
It's okay.
Yeah, it's true.
To another thing, and you will take the learnings from that. But like you said, your career wasn't linear. I don't think either of ours were. I don't think really anybody's is. There's maybe a select few, if you will,
yes,
linear careers. But for most of us, it is kind of winding, and it is okay. There are some false starts. There are some where it wasn't about the progression. It was about the learning within that role, and then you move on.
And just to add to that, I think in the midst of what you were saying, you were quite worried about some of the choices that you were making. And I'm just quite intrigued to kind of find out whether you had a bit of a destination or a point that you wanted to kind of get to when you were trying to figure out where exactly you wanted to be? Because like obviously you did mention as well you wanted to be successful. What did success look like for you? Journey.
I think for me, there was a sense that I felt that I should find my purpose. People always talk about your purpose and they always say you need to find out what it is you need to do. And then there was a lot of times where I was like, some of the time I didn't know what I wanted to do, but some of the time, which was the most difficult, is I knew what I wanted to do, but I couldn't get there. I felt like no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get there. Like I really wanted to work in magazines and I tried to work in magazines and it like didn't work out. So then I was like, what happens if you know your purpose, but then you feel like you don't have the opportunities to? Like the biggest thing for me, I remember at that time, was that I couldn't do an internship. There was all these people who, whenever they spoke, they'd say, oh, well, I did an internship in this and then that got me my first job. And I was like, I don't have that. I can't not work because I need to pay my rent and I need to live. So I was like, and I unfortunately, there wasn't somebody who could fund me to do that. So I was at that time, I think I was confused, and the sense of purpose was the main thing I was looking for. And in terms of success, that's a very interesting point because I don't think I knew what success really meant at that time. I knew that it did involve me being content. I didn't want to feel like, I felt like if I was constantly looking for something else or doing something else, then I wasn't content. Whereas now I look back and I just think the experimental phase of it all was the whole point. Like you're meant to look at different things. And I know like when you're younger, you're not taught that. You're taught you have a very linear career, when actually how it works out is it is best to experiment, like try out this one. Even like it's not just about trying things out when you first finish uni, it's about trying things out for the rest of your life, because you might change and maybe this role that you've had for the past 5 years doesn't work for you anymore, and that's fine. It doesn't mean anything about you in particular. It just means that that's the way things have worked out. So I would say, the main thing I was looking for was a sense of purpose and contentment.
I wanted to quickly jump into something that stood out to me. You talked about starting your own business. I'm intrigued. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I look back with such fond memories at that time. So because I'd wanted to work in magazines for so long, and it hadn't really worked out, and I had really tried and it hadn't worked out. And so then I'd always had this idea for a magazine. And then I write diaries all the time. I've done it like since I was about 7, on and off. But I try and write as much as I can. And then I looked back to the diary I'd written in my final year of uni, and it was like, finally, once and for all, do your magazine. And I was like, if I was thinking that so many years ago, then I need to be doing it now. So then I was like, okay, I'm going to start my magazine. So I was like, I'm going to give people the platform I wasn't given, and I'm going to make it easier for them to be published or have a place in media, because I found it so difficult. So I'm going to give a platform for other people to do it. And also at the time, I was like, many women's magazines focus more on fashion and style, which is just one aspect of what women are interested in. They're also interested in economics and current affairs, and those were the Economist was the kind of magazine that when I was at LSE, me and my friends were reading. But then we'd also feel a bit guilty because we'd be like, oh, I can't finish the whole magazine. I just read an article here or there. So I was like, okay. So then I started the business. It was going well. I got some traction. And it was going well, but then I learned a lot in that time, and I kind of thought to myself, I'm going to take a break from this and come back when I'm fully ready. So I was like, I'm going to continue to pursue my other career of content design, but when the time comes, I'm going to strike, and it's going to be great. That was my plan.
I really love that, because I think kind of to your point earlier around when you were upskilling, you were kind of looking for opportunities in your day job where you can learn things, learning from the internet. But I think one of the hidden gems for learning things is starting up your own business or side project.
Yeah.
Because you just learn so much. And
Yeah.
I want to know, did you learn anything that could help you in your content design job, or just more widely about working in the business world from running your own business?
Definitely. I agree. I think like starting your own businesses is a good way to learn things. I think nowadays everyone's told start a business, and I'm like, you don't have to start a business. Like only if you want to, or there's something you're interested in, then yeah, go for it. I think the number one thing it taught me, and this is so cliche, but it taught me confidence. I had to really put myself out there and email people I didn't know and just be like, can we have a meeting, and have to really promote myself, which I wasn't so used to doing. It was something I definitely had to learn. And so that really, really helped me just in life in general, but definitely in my career, because like when I go into interviews now, I'm like, I can do this. I'm not like a little bit unsure. I'm like, I can do this, and I am a great candidate, and you should want to have me in your organization. So that really helped. I think the second thing it taught me was to know my own value and worth. So I think oftentimes we feel grateful to get a role, or grateful to even be considered. And I think you should have a sense that actually you also have some luck in having me come and interview for you, because it's a two-way street. Like we're both getting something out of it. So then now, for example, I would ask for more money, whereas that isn't something I ever did before starting a business. If I feel that I am going to be good at this job, and I'm going above and beyond what is the job description, or I feel I'm at a high level, I will ask for more money. And I think so many people are nervous of doing that, but I always do. and it works out, because if you are confident in what you do and you're good at what you do, then that is conducive to getting more money for doing it. Mm-hmm. So that was the other thing I learned. And then the final thing, there was many things I learned, but then I think I learned more about relationships in general. Mm. So when you start a business, you're building all kinds of relationships. You're building business relationships, but also then your personal relationships are affected, and who supports you and who doesn't support you. Mm-hmm. And then also then you realize you have to create so many new relationships. You're because you're trying to build something, you start talking to people about it, and then if you aren't confident in yourself, then they don't believe in your idea as much. So then you learn that, and then the next person you go see, you have a bit more confidence in yourself. And then also then how your work and life merge together. When you're starting a business, it's kind of all blurred. You have to make your own boundaries. So then that was something else I learned. I was like, I want a work-life balance where I do have time away from it that is completely separate, and I'm not just become this one entity of business or not, which is perfectly fine once you're ready for it. Once you're ready for you to be your brand, you're your business, you're a person all in one, then that is the best time to strike out. And I think I'm getting there. Yes. But yeah, those were the three things I definitely learned.
Amazing.
I love it.
I'm very excited for when you kind of transition back into that magazine, because it sounds great. So yeah, love it. Yeah,
soon.
This is the time. Okay, so coming up to date, could you tell us about your current role?
Yeah, so currently, maybe I should have mentioned from the beginning a little bit what a content designer is, because it's one of those titles that not everybody understands. But basically how I like to think of it is I make complex information simple. So there'll be information that a company wants to put out to their users, who might be the general public. They may be a certain section of the general public. And then it's how can we say that to them in the best way using words, pictures, or videos. The main way that I work is with words. So at the moment, I work at TfL as a content designer, and I'm working specifically and maybe unpopularly, if that's a word, on road user charging. So getting charged for driving in certain zones, such as the congestion charge zone, the ultra low emission zone, and the low emission zone. But it is to make London air cleaner. That's why we have this zone that is just for cars, extra polluting cars. So we'll need to tell people where the zone is, what time, where it covers, and then me and the rest of the team will try and figure out the best way to do that.
Cool. So that sounds super interesting. And I guess kind of my follow-up question would be, what are the challenges of this role? I mean, obviously, I think working in a role that kind of touches people's like real everyday lives is super challenging and super interesting. But kind of, I think, because I myself am a writer, or I write, and I think when you're crafting things with words and thinking about the impact those words are going to have on people kind of down the line, it's a kind of weird place to be. And I think, and I imagine it is with most jobs, like if you're working with code or if you're working with wood as a carpenter, if you're thinking about the effect it's going to have. But like, how do you think about your job in those terms of like, you're working with words, but these words have a life of their own and are going to impact people out in the streets?
That's a very interesting point, because I guess words do have power, like even when you're speaking, but when you're writing, even more so, because then they're there in black and white at that period of time. That is what you meant. So I think maybe from a job perspective, the number one thing I'd say is that content design has certain principles that we follow. So we're not just writing in general. And content design principles will be that you focus on plain English or you use the simplest words. There is like a content design manual that was designed, like when content design came about, some people like to think they invented content design, but really like as the internet progressed and then when gov.uk became a thing, then content design and writing in plain English for the internet became the best way of doing things, because people don't spend that much time reading on the internet. When you read on the internet, there's all these studies to show you read in an F shape. So most people, their eyes naturally gravitate towards the left-hand side of the screen. And people like content that is short paragraphs, simpler, because many people are skim reading. So then there are certain principles that you follow which make things a lot easier. And there'll always be an editorial style guide, usually, at whichever company you're working at. So you'll follow content design principles and the editorial style guide. But then a part of it, which is the part that is the most interesting to me, is when you are writing stuff that does have value for people. Before this, I was working on Brexit for 3 years. And the nuances in that definitely made me appreciate the power of words even more so. And then being able to write things simply and clearly for people is quite rewarding. Like when you see it and then people are like, oh, I understand this perfectly. Then I'm like, that's great, because where it started was a very complex piece of information. But now you see the end point, which is a very simple piece of information that allows you to do exactly what you came on the internet to do. That's great. I've done my job well then.
Whoop. Cool. Okay. So what are like some of the more technical aspects of your work?
So I would say generally the content designer role doesn't need to be technical in any way. Like even with learning HTML, I didn't need to do that to become a content designer. Where it can become more tech is if you do want to work with HTML or you want to be able to learn how to code, you can do that and it may help you in your job, but you don't have to have technical capabilities. The other part is maybe when you're working within a tech team on a service. So a service would be anything on the internet where you need to complete a task. So when you want to register to vote, we'd say that might be a service. And when you're coming up with the content for that, you would probably work with a whole tech team. So you'd have a developer, you might have an interaction designer, you might have a user researcher, and you're working together to be able to create something. So in that time, you might be working closer with the developer. So it might be helpful to understand a little bit more about how their role works. Or you might be working with an interaction designer, so it may be helpful to know how their role works so that you can work more smoothly together. But I think you can be a content designer without having so many technical capabilities. I think the number one skill is definitely being able to make complex information simple for people, having an enjoyment of language, definitely. And the last thing that people maybe don't realize so much is building relationships. The majority of my job isn't necessarily writing all day. It's definitely managing relationships with people who might own the content, or people who are experts in whatever that topic is, and then you're going to have to condense that into more simple, easy to use language. So really it's about building relationships with people and managing those relationships and understanding people sometimes feel they have more ownership over a piece of content, and they don't want it to change, and then you're trying to persuade them to change it. And then also when you're working within a team, you have to understand, like, different people may want to do it in different ways and they may not understand content design as much. So you're constantly advocating for content design and promoting it. So you don't necessarily have to be technical, but it does sometimes help.
Cool. Okay. So what does an average day look like for you?
If I'm starting a new piece of work on a web page, sometimes somebody will come to me and say, "Oh, we want to make these changes to the web page because we have some more information, or we think that people aren't understanding that information so well." So then usually I'll sit down with them and whoever else has a stake in that web page, and we'll come up with what are the user needs. So what is the need of somebody coming to this web page? What do they need to know? And so then we'll come up with some user needs of everything they'll need to know from this web page. And then that will be the basis that I will start from to create some content. And we'll usually agree the user needs together. And then I'll usually go away, come up with something, and then we'll review it together. And usually it'll be a process. So generally, when you're working with people, they may not want to change it to what you have written, even though it may be easier for people to understand. So then it'll be like almost like a negotiation process of going through things, trying to come up with a good solution. And that would be if I'm working on a web page. If I'm working on a service such as Register to Vote, then usually we will have done some user research. So the user researcher would have gone out, spoken to the people who will be using this service. Then we'll all come together as a team, come up with some user needs, and then you'll be working on a design flow. So by that, I just mean, how will a user go through the journey they need to go through to get what they need done? And so then you might be working with a developer to see, is this even possible? Then you might be working with an interaction designer who will maybe come up with the general design of the page, and then you'll be like, oh, well, if you put some words here, you might be able to explain things easier rather than trying to fix that with design. And then you usually work together to come up with a good design flow, and then test it with people, then come back and change it. And then eventually, hopefully, you'll come up with a solution that works and you'll create a service together.
That is great. Thank you so much. I think that breakdown is going to be really valuable, especially for anyone who's thinking about entering this career path but is not quite sure how things work. So thanks for breaking that down for us. Okay, we're kind of coming to the end, but we'd really love to know kind of about your next steps. So kind of where do you see your career going from here in terms of content design? And obviously you've spoken about kind of your magazine and things you're thinking about in the future. So like, give us that kind of future vision that you have for yourself.
The future vision I have for myself is to survive this year. No, I'm joking. So my vision would be that I would I don't know how much to say whether my organization will be listening, but in the next few months, I plan to leave TFL and go back to the magazine. But before, it was always going to be a print magazine, whereas now I would like it to be an app as well as a print magazine. So that will be the main thing. If anything, it's come full circle because now my content design has made me realize how important tech is. And that I really want to make it a tech solution, not just an in-person solution. So I definitely think I'll focus on creating an app for the magazine and then also creating the print magazine. And now coming back full circle with everything I've learned, I think I will be able to push it forward better.
Yeah. Amazing.
That's so exciting.
So exciting. I think that full circle point is just key because I think that's how it is for kind of so many of our careers that, and you said it before, like there's a give and take. You are giving kind of your labor and your expertise to companies, but you're also kind of getting a lot in return, and it's building you up as a kind of creative or a person who can put their best out into the world as much as you are building up that company. So I think that kind of give and take in careers is something that people really, really need to kind of bear in mind. But it's key.
Yeah.
I don't know, and for me, I get an air of like patience from you. Like I think you sound like you've been quite patient with the journey. I guess like maybe earlier on the kind of frustrations of not knowing exactly where the destination point was, or just kind of not being sure on the choices. But I guess now in your career or in the path, your journey path, I definitely get a sense of you being quite at peace with like where you are. That's just the sense I'm getting. Maybe.
No, I think that's very true. That's a very sweet thing to say. I do. Yeah, I think that is definitely it because I think I came to an understanding that it is as you say. Everybody has a different path. And I think oftentimes if you compare yourself to others, you'll be like, well, was theirs a roundabout path? Because they seem to have just went straight up. But then I'm like, but there's a beauty in the path. Maybe sometimes there isn't a beauty in the path and it's not so great. But then eventually it does take you to a place where you can look back and be like, okay, this is why this happened and this is why this happened. And so then it's just now I think I have a greater sense of, yes, I do have a greater sense of peace that I understand that it will be okay and that I will achieve what I need to. I think before I was so worried about whether I would or not, but if I just believe I will, I think that's the main thing. Like now, if I believe I will, then I will make it happen.
Amazing. Well, Leena, thank you so much for speaking with us today.
Thank you.
I feel like you've just given so much, a wealth of insight and information to kind of our listeners. So I'm so grateful. Just as a kind of a last thing, is there anything you want to just kind of speak about in terms of where people can find you online and things that you want people to look out for?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me. I've really enjoyed being on this podcast. If you want to find me, I'm at leena.loves, LEENA.LOVES on Instagram. And also look out for Mannequin Magazine.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. And
thank you, Leena.
Thanks for joining us today and listening to this episode of A Seat at the Tech Table. You can connect with us on our social media platforms. Just search @SistersInTech on Twitter and Instagram. And check out our website, www.sistersin.tech, to see what we've got going on. Don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes, and we'll bring you the next episode soon.